Don't tell them you're coming." Those were the last words he said before the line went quiet. I stood in the parking lot outside the range, the smell of gunpowder still clinging to my sleeves, my hearing protection hanging loose around my neck. The North Carolina sun was sliding down behind the tree line, turning the sky a soft, fading orange. Marines were laughing behind me, unloading gear, arguing about dinner plans. And I was staring at my phone. Unknown number. "I sold you the house," the man had said. At first I thought it was some kind of mistake. Telemarketer. Wrong number. But then he said something that made my stomach tighten. "The cameras are still linked to my cloud." I didn't speak. My training has taught me to let people talk. "I pulled up the footage," he continued. I didn't mean to. I was clearing out old files. I saw movement. There was a pause. I could hear him swallow. "Your father." Another pause. "Your brother." My grip tightened around the phone. "And an agent." I remember looking at the empty stretch of road beyond the base gate, trying to picture what that meant. "An agent insurance contractor." "They're measuring the living room," he said quietly. I felt the ground shift under me, though my boots didn't move an inch. "I think you need to come home," he said. "Don't tell them." And then silence. The house. The one I had bought 6 months ago. The one that had belonged to my grandfather before he moved out. The one I had promised myself I would keep in the family. I leaned against the hood of my truck and closed my eyes for a moment. When you're a Marine long enough, you learn how to compartmentalize. You file fear away. You postpone anger. You act when it's time to act. But this wasn't a battlefield. This was Ohio. This was family. My father had always believed my older brother Mark deserved more patience, more understanding, more chances. Mark had never held a steady job longer than a year. Real estate schemes, used cars, a roofing company that folded before the first winter. When Grandpa started slowing down 2 years ago, it was me who flew home on my leave, me who drove him to his appointments, me who sat beside him in the VA waiting room and listened to him tell the same stories about Korea and the winter of '52. He never forgot those stories. He forgot my brother's phone number. The house had been his pride, a modest ranch-style home on Maple Street, 3 bedrooms, hardwood floors, a maple tree in the front yard he planted the year my father was born. When he told me he was thinking about moving into assisted living, he didn't want to burden anyone. "I don't want your father fighting over it," he had said. I remember that afternoon clearly. We were sitting at the kitchen table, the same table where I had done homework as a kid. "I'll buy it from you," I told him. He looked at me over his glasses. "You don't have to." "I want to." We had it appraised. We did it properly, a clean sale, money wired into his account, no drama. Or so I thought. Now some real estate agent was measuring my living room. I opened my eyes and got back into my truck. I didn't drive right away, I just sat there. There are moments in life when everything slows down. You don't shout, you don't panic, you take inventory. Fact 1, the house was in my name. Fact 2, my father had never approved of that. Fact 3, Mark had been circling it like a hawk ever since Grandpa moved out. I called the number back. He answered on the second ring. "I didn't think you would," he said. "I need the footage," I replied. He hesitated only a second. "I can send it." "Send all of it." "I will." He exhaled. "I'm sorry, I didn't think it was my place." "It's not," I said calmly, "but you did the right thing." When I hung up, my phone buzzed almost immediately, a file transfer notification. I didn't watch it there in the parking lot. Instead, I drove to the barracks, parked in my usual spot, and carried my gear inside. A couple of younger Marines nodded as I passed. "Ma'am?" I nodded back. Inside my room, I locked the door and set my laptop on the desk. The footage loaded slowly. Black and white image, timestamp in the corner. The front door opening. My father stepped in first, hands behind his back like he owned the place. Mark followed, talking fast, gesturing. Then a third man, mid-40s, clipboard, laser measuring tool. They walked into the living room. I watched my brother stretch the tape measure from one wall to the other. I watched my father point at the ceiling at the windows. I couldn't hear the audio clearly, but I saw my father's lips move. "She won't fight it." I replayed that part 3 times. "She won't fight it." I leaned back in my chair and let the weight of it settle. They thought distance meant disinterest. They thought the uniform meant I was too busy. They thought silence meant surrender. They were wrong. I closed the laptop. I didn't call my father. I didn't call Mark. Instead, I opened my calendar and requested emergency leave. Reason: family matter. No explanation. The sergeant major approved it within the hour. I had a reputation for not asking for things lightly. That night, I packed a small bag. Not much, civilian clothes, a folder with copies of the deed and the sale documents I always kept scanned in my cloud account. Before I turned out the light, I stood for a moment in the quiet. Grandpa's words came back to me. Character isn't what you say. It's what you do when nobody's watching. Well, somebody had been watching. And now I was going home. I didn't sleep much that night. You'd think after years in the Marine Corps I'd be used to moving on short notice, used to packing up and stepping into uncertainty. But this was different. This wasn't orders from a commanding officer. This was blood. The flight out of Jacksonville left just after dawn. I kept my uniform simple and unremarkable, no medals, no display, just another Marine on leave. I didn't want attention. I wanted clarity. As the plane lifted off North Carolina, shrinking beneath us, I replayed the footage in my mind instead of on my screen. My father standing in the center of my living room. Mark measuring the walls. The agent nodding, writing something down. She won't fight it. I had spent my adult life proving I would fight when necessary. But I had also learned something more important: you don't rush into a situation without understanding the terrain. By the time I landed in Columbus, Ohio, the sky was gray and familiar. Late autumn had stripped most of the leaves from the trees. The air carried that particular Midwest chill that settles into your bones. I rented a car instead of borrowing one from family. I didn't call anyone. I didn't even text. The drive to Maple Street took 45 minutes. Every mile felt like stepping backward through time. The hardware store where Grandpa used to buy nails by the pound. The diner where he ordered black coffee and pie. The small American flags on porches, faded but still upright. When I turned onto Maple, I slowed instinctively. The house looked the same. Maple tree out front, porch light off, curtains drawn halfway. But there was a sedan in the driveway I didn't recognize. I didn't pull in. Instead, I parked half a block down near Mrs. Ellison's house. She had lived there longer than I had been alive. If anyone noticed anything unusual, it would be her. I stepped out of the car and let the cold air hit my face. The sedan's trunk was open. A sign frame leaned against the garage wall. For sale. It wasn't up yet. But it was ready. I walked slowly down the sidewalk, pretending to check my phone as I passed the house. The blinds in the living room were tilted open just enough. Through the gap I saw movement. Mark again, the agent, my father near the fireplace. The agent held up his phone, taking pictures. I kept walking. When I reached the corner, I turned and circled back on the opposite side of the street. I wasn't angry. Not yet. I was observing. I got back into the rental car and sat there, hands resting lightly on the steering wheel. Then I called the man who had sold me the house. "I'm here," I said. He didn't sound surprised. "Did you see it?" "Yes." He cleared his throat. I checked the MLS listings. Nothing official yet. "That means they're preparing," I replied. "Yes, ma'am." I hesitated. "Has anyone else accessed the footage?" "No, I took the account offline after I called you." "Thank you." There was a pause. "I didn't want to get involved," he admitted. "But I've seen things like this before. Families, they don't always handle property well." "I understand," I said quietly. After I hung up, I opened my laptop again and reviewed the deed. My name. Clear title. Recorded with the county. They couldn't legally sell it. Unless Mark was using Grandpa's old power of attorney. My chest tightened slightly at that thought. 2 years ago, when Grandpa had surgery, he had signed temporary paperwork, allowing my father to help manage his bills. It had been limited, specific. Had they extended it? Or worse, had they convinced him to sign something new? I started the car and drove to the assisted living facility where Grandpa had been staying. Oak Ridge Senior Living sat on the edge of town, a brick building with trimmed hedges and a small American flag near the entrance. The same flag flew there every day, rain or shine. I walked inside and gave my name at the front desk. The nurse smiled politely. "He'll be glad to see you." When I stepped into his room, he was sitting by the window, a blanket over his knees, watching the parking lot. For a second, he didn't notice me. Then he did. He smiled the same way he always had. Marine, he said. I crossed the room and knelt beside his chair. How you doing, Grandpa? Still breathing, he replied. That's a start. I didn't ask about the house immediately. We talked about ordinary things first. The food. The nurses. The Browns losing again. Then I asked as casually as I could, has Dad been by lately? He nodded. He and Mark came last week. What did they talk about? He frowned slightly, thinking. Bills. Something about the house. He looked at me. They said it would be easier if they handled it. Handled what? I don't remember exactly. That answer settled like a stone in my stomach. He was still sharp in many ways. But paperwork and legal language were not his strength. Did you sign anything? I asked gently. He hesitated. I sign things all the time here, forms, medication sheets. That's not what I mean. He looked at his hands. I don't remember. That was enough. I stayed with him for 2 hours. When I finally stood to leave, he squeezed my hand. You're not in trouble, are you? He asked. No, sir. He nodded once. Good, because if you are, we'll fix it. I smiled despite myself. Outside, the wind had picked up. I stood in the parking lot and looked toward town. This wasn't about confrontation anymore. This was about documentation. If they were preparing to sell my house using Grandpa's authority, I needed to see exactly what they had filed. I didn't drive back to Maple Street. Instead, I headed straight for the county recorder's office. They thought I wouldn't fight it. They thought I wouldn't even know. They were still measuring walls. I was about to measure the law. The county recorder's office hadn't changed since I was a teenager. Same brick building, same metal railing along the steps, same faded notice taped inside the glass door reminding visitors to silence their phones. It was nearly 4 p.m. when I walked in. A bell chimed softly overhead. Behind the counter sat a woman in her 60s with short gray hair and reading glasses perched halfway down her nose. She looked up. Can I help you? Yes, ma'am, I said. I'd like to check recent filings on a property, Maple Street. She slid a clipboard toward me. Address. I gave it. She typed slowly, deliberately. The rhythm of the keys sounded almost comforting. Familiar. Steady. After a moment, she frowned slightly. There was an inquiry filed yesterday, she said. My heartbeat slowed, not sped up. I've learned over the years that adrenaline is useful only if you control it. What kind of inquiry? Preliminary title check. Looks like it was requested by a local brokerage. There it was. Has anything been recorded? I asked. Not yet. No transfer. No new deed. She scrolled again. But there is a power of attorney on file. My throat tightened just enough to remind me I was human. What date? She turned the monitor slightly so I could see. 3 weeks ago. My father's name listed as agent. Authority General Financial and Property Decisions. Signed by my grandfather. I stared at the date. 3 weeks ago. The week I had been in Arizona for joint training exercises. The week Grandpa had called me and said he was a little tired lately. Can I get a copy? I asked. She nodded and printed it without comment. Small-town offices still operate on quiet professionalism. When she handed me the stapled pages, I recognized the signature immediately. It was his. But it wasn't strong. The line that usually slanted upward had dipped. The pressure was uneven. Was this notarized here? I asked. She checked again. No, private notary, signature verified by a mobile service. Mobile service? They didn't even bring him downtown. They brought the paperwork to him. I thanked her and stepped outside. The late afternoon air felt colder than before. I stood on the sidewalk and read the document carefully. General authority. That meant selling. That meant listing. That meant everything. I didn't feel anger. I felt clarity. They hadn't forged it. They had arranged it. There's a difference. One is criminal from the start. The other hides inside technical legality. I drove to a small law office 2 blocks from the courthouse. A brass plaque near the door read, William Hartley, attorney at Law, Estate, and Probate. If anyone in this town understood family property disputes, it would be him. The waiting room smelled faintly of coffee and old paper. Framed certificates lined the walls. A photograph of Mr. Hartley shaking hands with a retired judge hung behind the receptionist. He saw me within 20 minutes. He was in his 70s, tall, thin white hair combed back neatly. His handshake was firm. "What brings you in?" he asked. I placed the power of attorney on his desk. He read it slowly. "Did your grandfather understand what he was signing?" he asked. "I don't know," I replied honestly. "Does he have a diagnosis of cognitive decline?" "Mild memory issues, nothing declared incompetent." Mr. Hartley leaned back in his chair. "This isn't illegal on its face," he said carefully, "but that doesn't mean it's beyond scrutiny." I appreciated that wording. "I own the house," I said, "clear title." He nodded. "Then they cannot sell it without your signature. Unless they claim financial mismanagement." He studied me. "Is there debt on the property?" "No." "Back taxes?" "No." "Outstanding liens?" "No." He folded his hands. "Then this looks less like necessity and more like presumption." That word settled deeply. Presumption. She won't fight it. I explained the camera footage, the measuring, the agent. Mr. Hartley didn't interrupt. When I finished, he tapped the edge of the document lightly. "If they attempt to list or transfer without your consent, we can file an injunction immediately." "How fast?" "Same day." I exhaled slowly. "What about the power of attorney?" I asked. "That depends on capacity at the time of signing. If your grandfather did not fully understand the scope, it can be challenged." "Would that require him to testify?" "Possibly." I thought of Grandpa in that chair by the window. He shouldn't have to defend his own autonomy. "Is there another option?" I asked. "Yes," he said. "You can speak to your father first." I shook my head. "Not yet." He didn't argue. Instead, he said, "Then we prepare." I left his office just before closing time. The sun was almost gone. On the drive back toward Maple Street, I saw it. The for sale sign. It was in the yard now. White post, blue and red logo, a rider beneath it with a phone number. I parked across the street. Mark was standing outside, arms crossed, admiring it. My father came out behind him. They looked satisfied. For a moment, I considered stepping out of the car, confronting them, demanding answers. But confrontation without leverage is noise. Instead, I took a picture. Then I drove away. Back at the hotel, I emailed the photo to Mr. Hartley. Subject line, "It's listed." Within 15 minutes, he replied, "We file in the morning." I set my phone down and sat quietly in the dim light of the room. In the Marine Corps, we talk about discipline, about patience, about timing. You don't move because you're angry. You move because it's effective. They had assumed distance meant weakness. They had assumed silence meant permission. Tomorrow they would learn the difference. The courthouse opened at 8. I was there at 7:45. Maple Street was quiet when I drove past that morning. The sign still stood in the yard, bright and confident. A small detail caught my eye. There was already a brochure box attached to the post. That meant they weren't testing the waters. They were moving forward. I didn't stop. Mr. Hartley was already in his office when I arrived. His coat was still on the rack behind the door, but a pot of coffee was brewing, and the power of attorney document lay neatly beside a yellow legal pad filled with notes. He looked up when I walked in. "They didn't waste time," he said. "No," I replied. "They never do when they think something is theirs." He nodded once as if he understood more than I'd said. He slid a draft across the desk toward me. "Petition for temporary injunction." I read every line. The language was precise and calm, nothing dramatic, nothing accusatory. It stated the facts. I was the lawful owner. A power of attorney had been executed recently. An attempt was being made to list the property without my consent. Immediate relief was necessary to prevent unlawful transfer. "This won't escalate things unnecessarily?" I asked. "It will escalate them appropriately," he replied. That answer felt honest. I signed. He stood, gathered the documents, and said, "We'll file immediately. The judge should review it before noon." As he left for the courthouse, I stayed behind in his office for a moment, staring at the framed photograph on the wall of him with his late wife. People my grandfather's age and older had grown up believing in certain rules, handshake agreements, spoken promises, family honor. But time changes things. Paper changes things. I stepped back out into the morning air. Instead of returning to the hotel, I drove toward Oak Ridge Senior Living again. If this was going to unfold publicly, Grandpa needed to hear it from me, not from my father. He was in the common room this time reading a newspaper. He looked up and smiled faintly. You back already? Yes, sir. I sat across from him. I need to ask you something important. He folded the paper carefully. All right. Do you remember signing papers a few weeks ago, something giving Dad authority over your finances? He frowned slightly. I remember signing something. Your father said it would make things easier, less paperwork. Did he explain that it would allow him to sell property? He hesitated. I don't recall that part. That was enough. Grandpa, I said gently, they put a for sale sign in the yard. He blinked. My yard? Yes, sir. He stared at me for a long moment. I sold it to you, he said quietly. Yes, you did. His jaw tightened in a way I hadn't seen since I was a teenager. That house isn't his to sell. No, sir. He looked toward the window, then back at me. Did I sign something that gives him that right? You signed a power of attorney. We're reviewing it. He leaned back slowly. I trusted him. I know. There are few things harder than watching a man realize he may have been used. I won't let them take it, I said. He studied me carefully. I don't want you fighting your father. I'm not fighting him, I replied. I'm protecting what's yours and what's mine. He nodded after a moment. Your grandmother would have liked that. We sat in silence for a while. When I left, I felt steadier. By 11:30, my phone rang. Mr. Hartley. It's granted, he said. Temporary injunction approved. The brokerage will be served this afternoon. I closed my eyes briefly. What about my father? He'll receive notice as agent under the power of attorney. I imagined the look on Mark's face when someone handed him legal paperwork. This doesn't end it, Mr. Hartley continued. There will be a hearing. When? 10 days. 10 days? That gave them time to prepare. And it gave me time to decide how far I was willing to go. I drove back toward Maple Street in the early afternoon. This time I didn't hide. I parked in the driveway. The for sale sign stood tall at the edge of the yard. I stepped out and walked straight toward it. Mark came out the front door almost immediately. He froze when he saw me. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then he forced a smile. You didn't say you were coming home. I didn't need to. My father stepped out behind him. He looked older than I remembered, thinner, but his posture was still rigid. What are you doing here? He asked. I own this house, I said evenly. That's what I'm doing here. Mark scoffed. We're just helping Grandpa manage things. With a realtor, I asked. It's complicated, he said. No, I replied calmly, it's not. My father's eyes narrowed slightly. You're overreacting. At that exact moment, a sedan pulled up to the curb. The brokerage logo was on the door. The agent stepped out and then hesitated when he saw me. Behind him was a second vehicle. A county officer. He walked toward us with a clipboard. Mr. Thompson, he asked my father. Yes. You've been served. Mark's smile vanished. The officer handed my father the injunction papers. The agent stepped backward slowly. What is this? My father demanded. It's a court order, I said quietly. You cannot list or sell this property. Mark looked at me as if I had betrayed him. You didn't have to do this, he said. Yes, I replied, I did. The agent cleared his throat. I'm going to suspend all activity until this is resolved. He got back into his car without another word. The for sale sign stood between us. My father held the papers tightly in his hands. You're tearing this family apart, he said. I looked at him steadily. No, I answered. I'm keeping it honest. 10 days can feel like 10 years when you're waiting for a courtroom. In that time, Maple Street grew quieter. The brokerage removed the listing from its website within 24 hours of being served. The for sale sign remained in the yard for 3 days before someone Mark 1 assumed took it down in the early morning. No apology, no conversation. Just removal. I didn't go back to the house during those days. I stayed at the hotel near the interstate, drove to see Grandpa every afternoon, and met twice more with Mr. Hartley. He explained the likely structure of the hearing. This isn't criminal court, he said. It's civil. The judge will want clarity, not drama. I'm not interested in drama, I replied. I can tell. We gathered everything. Copy of the deed showing my ownership. Bank records confirming the purchase was legitimate. Medical notes from Oak Ridge documenting Grandpa's mild cognitive impairment. The power of attorney. And still images from the security footage, the date the measuring tape stretched across my living room. Mr. Hartley reviewed each document carefully. Your father's argument will likely be necessity, he said, that your grandfather required financial oversight. He does require help, I acknowledged, but not replacement. The morning of the hearing, the courthouse steps were damp from overnight rain. A few local reporters stood across the street not because of us, but because small towns always have something happening. Probate disputes are more common than people think. Inside the courtroom was modest. Wood-paneled walls, state flag behind the bench, rows of seating that creaked softly when people shifted. My father and Mark were already there. They didn't look at me when I entered. Mark wore a suit that didn't quite fit him. My father held himself stiffly as if posture alone could control the narrative. The judge entered promptly at 9. She was in her late 60s, silver hair, neatly styled reading glasses balanced on her nose. I recognized her name from town events years ago. Good morning, she said. Let's proceed. Mr. Hartley spoke first. Calm, direct, respectful. He outlined the ownership of the property, the recent execution of the power of attorney, and the attempted listing without my consent. No accusations. Just facts. Then my father's attorney stood. He was younger, confident. Your Honor, he began, this is a misunderstanding within a family. My client acted in good faith under a valid power of attorney. The judge leaned forward slightly. Good faith does not override title law, she said evenly. Proceed. The attorney argued that Grandpa's increasing memory issues required centralized financial management, that selling the house would simplify matters. Did the principal request the sale, the judge asked. There was a brief pause. The principal expressed concerns about upkeep, the attorney replied carefully. That is not the same as authorizing a sale, the judge noted. Mr. Hartley then requested permission to show the still images from the security footage. The judge nodded. The images appeared on a small monitor facing the bench. My father, Mark, the agent, measuring walls, gesturing. The timestamp clearly displayed. Was the property listed at the time of these images, the judge asked. No, Your Honor, Mr. Hartley replied, but preparatory steps were underway. The judge removed her glasses and looked directly at my father. Mr. Thompson, did your daughter consent to this listing? My father's jaw tightened. She's rarely in town, he said. We assumed she would agree. Assumption is not consent, the judge responded. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the overhead lights. The judge then addressed the power of attorney. Has there been a formal capacity evaluation of the principal? No, Your Honor, the opposing attorney admitted. Then this court will not presume incapacity or necessity without evidence. She paused, reviewing her notes. I am maintaining the injunction. No sale, listing, or transfer shall proceed without explicit consent from the titled owner. Mark shifted in his seat. The judge continued. Additionally, I am ordering a capacity assessment of the principal to determine whether the power of attorney was executed with full understanding. My father looked toward his attorney, who gave him a tight nod. This is not a punishment, the judge added. It is protection. Protection. That word settled into the room differently than accusation would have. The hearing lasted less than an hour. When it ended, the judge looked at me directly. Family disputes over property often carry deeper wounds, she said. I encourage resolution with dignity. Yes, Your Honor, I replied. Outside the courtroom, the hallway felt narrower than before. Mark approached me first. You didn't have to drag this into court, he said under his breath. You didn't have to measure my living room, I answered calmly. He shook his head. You think you're better than us because you wear that uniform. This has nothing to do with my uniform, I said. It has everything to do with ownership. My father stepped closer. You embarrassed us. I met his eyes. You underestimated me. He looked away first. There's a moment in any confrontation when the volume drops, when shouting would be easier, but silence carries more weight. We'll see what the evaluation says, he muttered. Yes, I replied, we will. That afternoon I drove to Oak Ridge and told Grandpa what had happened. They can't sell it, I said. He nodded slowly. I figured you'd handle it. I'm not trying to hurt Dad. I know. He looked at me carefully. But sometimes doing right still hurts. I thought about that on the drive back to the hotel. The injunction held. The house remained mine. But this wasn't over. The capacity assessment would either confirm Grandpa understood what he signed, or it would expose something deeper. And if it exposed something deeper, I would have a choice. Protect him quietly. Or pursue consequences. I had 10 more days to decide what kind of daughter I wanted to be. The capacity evaluation was scheduled for the following Tuesday. 10 days can stretch thin when pride is involved. In those 10 days, no one from my family called me. Not my father, not Mark. The silence wasn't accidental. It was strategic. If they didn't speak to me, they didn't have to admit they'd miscalculated. I continued visiting Grandpa daily. We talked about ordinary things, weather, baseball, the price of gas, while something unspoken hung between us. He never asked whether I would press charges. I never said the words fraud or exploitation. But the possibility lingered. The evaluation took place at Oak Ridge. A licensed geriatric psychiatrist drove in from Columbus. Professional, neutral, thorough. I wasn't allowed in the room during the assessment. Neither was my father. We waited in opposite corners of the lobby. I sat near the window. My father stood by the coffee machine. We didn't look at each other. After an hour, the doctor emerged with a thin folder. "Mr. Thompson demonstrates mild cognitive impairment," he said carefully. However, in my professional opinion, he did not fully comprehend the scope of a general financial power of attorney at the time it was signed. My father's shoulders dropped almost imperceptibly. "That doesn't mean he's incompetent," the doctor added. "It means the explanation given to him was likely insufficient." Insufficient. A polite word for misled. The legal implications were immediate. Mr. Hartley filed a motion to revoke the power of attorney on grounds of lack of informed consent. With the medical opinion attached, it would be difficult to contest. That evening, my father called me for the first time. His voice sounded older than it had in court. "Can we talk?" he asked. "Yes. At the house." I drove there just before sunset. The maple tree in the yard was nearly bare now. The for sale sign was gone. Only the small hole in the grass remained. Inside the house smelled faintly of dust and old wood. My father stood in the living room. Mark leaned against the doorway to the kitchen. "No realtor, no agent, just us." "You embarrassed this family," my father said quietly. I didn't respond to the accusation. "The doctor says Grandpa didn't understand," I said instead. My father rubbed his forehead. "He wanted us to handle things." "Handling isn't the same as selling." Mark pushed off the doorway. "We were trying to simplify things," he insisted. "He's not getting younger." "And neither are you," I said evenly. "But that doesn't give me the right to sell your house." Mark's jaw tightened. "You live hundreds of miles away." "I bought this house so it would stay in the family." "Exactly," Mark snapped. "In the family." "It is in the family," I replied. "It's in mine." The words landed harder than I intended. Silence filled the room. My father sank slowly into Grandpa's old armchair. "I didn't think you'd fight it," he admitted. I looked at him. "I know." He met my eyes for the first time since the hearing. "You've always done things on your own." "Yes. And you don't need us." "That's not true." He blinked. "But you decided what I needed without asking," I continued. Mark exhaled sharply. "So what now?" he demanded. "Now," I said calmly, "we revoke the power of attorney. Grandpa appoints a neutral financial advisor. All decisions are documented and transparent." "You want to drag strangers into this?" Mark asked. "I want accountability." My father leaned forward slightly. "And if we refuse?" I met his gaze steadily. "Then I pursue elder exploitation charges." The words were quiet, not a threat, a fact. Mark's face drained of color. My father closed his eyes briefly. "You'd do that?" he asked. "If I have to." The room felt smaller. Finally, my father nodded once. "No charges," he said. "We'll revoke it." Mark stared at him. "Dad." "It's done," my father said firmly. For the first time in years, he sounded decisive for the right reason. 2 days later, the revocation was filed. A licensed fiduciary was appointed to assist Grandpa with financial decisions. The house remained solely in my name. The legal tension eased. But emotional tension doesn't dissolve as cleanly as paperwork. On my last evening before returning to base, I sat alone in the living room. The same living room they had measured. The hardwood floors creaked softly as I walked across them. I thought about pressing charges anyway. The footage, the medical opinion, the court order, it would have been possible. But possible and necessary are not the same. Grandpa had asked for peace, not punishment. When my father arrived that evening, he didn't knock. He stood near the doorway. "I was wrong," he said quietly. I didn't respond immediately. "I thought you'd move on," he continued. "You've always moved on." "I don't move on from family," I said. He swallowed. "I didn't mean to take it from you." "But you were willing to?" He nodded slowly. "Yes." That honesty mattered more than any apology. "I don't hate you," I said. "I know." He looked around the room. "You kept your word to your grandfather." "Yes." He paused. I should have respected that. We stood there for a long moment in silence. This wasn't a dramatic reconciliation. It was something quieter. A recognition. When I left the next morning, I didn't feel victorious. I felt resolved. The house was safe. Grandpa was protected. And the line between loyalty and control had finally been drawn. The morning I left Ohio, the sky was clear. Not bright in a dramatic way, just steady. Blue over Maple Street sunlight filtering through the bare branches of the maple tree Grandpa had planted more than 60 years ago. I stood on the porch for a long moment before locking the door. The house felt different now, not because of what had happened, but because of what hadn't. It hadn't been sold. It hadn't been divided. It hadn't been turned into another quiet family story people tell in lowered voices at Thanksgiving. It was still standing. Just like Grandpa. 2 weeks after the hearing, the fiduciary helped Grandpa draft a simple living trust. Clear language, limited authority, transparency written into every clause. Copies sent to me and to my father. No one could claim confusion again. When I told Grandpa the paperwork was complete, he nodded slowly. "That's good," he said. "Less arguing when I'm gone." I didn't like that phrasing. "You're not going anywhere," I replied. He smiled faintly. "Everyone goes somewhere eventually." There's something about being raised by a generation that lived through war and recession. They don't dramatize the end of things, they plan for them. A week before I returned to base, my father invited me to dinner. It wasn't sentimental. It wasn't emotional. It was quiet. He grilled burgers in the backyard. Mark showed up late. No one mentioned the court. Halfway through the meal, my father cleared his throat. "I shouldn't have assumed," he said. It wasn't an elaborate apology. But it was enough. Mark didn't apologize outright. That wasn't his way. But he did ask me about the Marines, about what training looked like now, about how often I planned to visit. For the first time in years, the conversation wasn't about what I owed the family. It was about who I was within it. On my last evening, I drove Grandpa back to the house so he could see it again. He moved slowly up the front walk, hand on my arm. Inside, he stood in the living room, the room they had measured. "Still the same," he said softly. "Yes, sir." He looked at the walls, the fireplace, the old hardwood floors. "You did right," he told me. "I didn't want to hurt anyone." "Doing right and hurting someone aren't opposites," he replied. "Sometimes they travel together." I helped him sit in his old chair for a few minutes. He closed his eyes. Not in exhaustion. In contentment. When I drove him back to Oak Ridge, he didn't say much. At the entrance, before I stepped out of the car, he said something that stayed with me. "Property isn't what tears families apart," he said. "Pride does." Back at base, life resumed its rhythm. Early mornings. Briefings. Range days. But something inside me had shifted. For years, I believed strength meant distance, that if I kept my head down and handled my responsibilities, family issues would sort themselves out. They don't. Silence isn't peace. Avoidance isn't loyalty. And ownership of property or of responsibility requires clarity. A month later, my father called again. Not about the house. Not about paperwork. Just to ask how training was going. It wasn't a dramatic transformation. It was gradual, measured, real. Mark found steady work with a construction company that winter. He stopped talking about easy money and started asking Grandpa for advice about budgeting. The house on Maple Street remains in my name. But more importantly, it remains understood. Grandpa's trust ensures no one can move pieces in the dark again. No hidden signatures. No quiet measuring tapes stretching across rooms that don't belong to them. Looking back, I realized something. When the man who sold me the house called and said, "Don't tell them, I thought the battle would be loud." It wasn't. It was paperwork. It was patience. It was choosing not to explode when it would have been easier. For those of you listening who've seen families divide over land, over money, over inheritance, I hope you take something from this. Don't wait until silence becomes assumption. Don't assume distance means disinterest. And if you're ever asked to sign something you don't fully understand, pause, ask questions, bring in someone neutral. Protection isn't betrayal. Accountability isn't disrespect. And sometimes the strongest thing you can do isn't to shout. It's to stand quietly in a room someone tried to take from you and refuse to move. If this story meant something to you, if you've walked through something similar, share it. Talk about it. These conversations matter, especially in families that believe they shouldn't. And if you'd like to hear more stories about honor family and the quiet strength it takes to protect both, I invite you to stay with this channel. Thank you for listening.